Last week on the UnSeen. In the beginning, there was only the Creator until He spoke. And when He spoke, the heavens, the earth, all that filled the earth, and the divine council were formed. And it was very good until, out of jealousy, the council rebelled against the Creator in a garden. And as a result, all hell broke loose on earth and in the heavens, taking place right before our eyes, and yet missed by us. The war of the unseen was waged. Over time, rebel gods intermarried with image-bearing women, wreaking havoc on the earth. In response, the Creator had to reset. He told the rebels, "It is finished," that the days of their offspring wreaking havoc in His creation were over. But the rebels would not be stopped. They misled the image bearers into believing they could be gods. Instead, the image bearers were cast out from the Creator's presence and given the rebels to rule them. But the Creator was not finished. He chose a people for Himself. Back and forth this battle of the unseen went until finally the Creator went silent. The rebels believed they had won, but they overlooked the warning signs of the Creator's patient planning.
It had been 400 years since the Creator had gone silent. And over those centuries, the rebels had convinced the image bearers that they had indeed won the war, or at the very least, that the Creator had decided He just didn't care about His image bearers. But in reality, the image bearer was simply practicing one of his many qualities. He was practicing patience. Through those years, the rebels firmly established themselves on the earth, and some of the image bearers were enjoying the reign of the rebels. Convinced to betray the longing of their hearts for their God-given, their Creator-given purpose, their minds were instead filled with the deceptions of the rebel gods, convincing them that there was an image-bearer hierarchy created. The rebel gods honed their strategies of convincing the image bearers to destroy one another. Justice, mercy, and compassion were perverted to serve agendas rather than to serve people. In the seen world, the kings ruled. Years after that fateful day at the tower, the emperors had elevated themselves to the status of gods. Male image bearers were killed for sport, while female image bearers were conquered for pleasure. On one corner, excess, and on another corner, extreme poverty. And interlaced underneath all of it, the rebel gods worked fear into the hearts of the image bearers. Fear that what little they had could be taken away by someone with greater status, and fear that those with excess could lose everything at a moment. The earth that had been so carefully and thoughtfully created had been defiled by a den of pleasure-seeking, violence-reveling, conquering image bearers who had given their lives to the unseen rebel gods. Annoyed and frustrated as they were by those holdouts to the Creator, the rebels realized that the faithful image bearers really weren't causing a whole lot of damage. Few listened to their ramblings and goings on about the Creator, and the rebel gods had jumbled up the message so much that it was increasingly difficult to find somebody who actually had any idea what it is that the Creator desired. But in a remote part of the world that existed at that moment, hidden mostly outside of the watchful eyes of the rebel scouts, the Creator finally played the ace that he had been holding on to for centuries. For a few brief moments, the Creator's unseen warriors stepped into the seen world to announce to a chosen select few that he was getting ready to make a move. The rumors swirled in the unseen. The Creator had sent an individual into the seen image-bearing world, but they could not locate him. Over time, they began to relax and enjoy their kingdom again. Maybe the rebels decided they really had eliminated the threat when they convinced the image-bearing king to murder all those image-bearing little boys. Over time, the Creator's hidden image-bearer grew, though. He just didn't look like anybody to be concerned about. Certainly, he didn't look like a god. He was magnificently average, able to blend in with any crowd, which is why, as he walked into the river that day, the rebel gods only watched with mild curiosity. But as the baptizer lifted him out of the water, what they heard next got their attention, and it left them rattled. After 400 years of silence, all who were listening heard those words, "I'm back." All those years ago in a garden, the rebel leader who had set them on their path to the glory they now lived in had to convince those original image bearers to step away from the Creator. And he declared to the rebels today that he would do the same with this one that the Creator had declared his son. Employing his age-old tactic of twisting the words of the Creator, he quickly realized that this image bearer was more spiritually prepared. This image bearer countered each blow. He rejected every false promise. It was as if he knew the mind of the Creator like it was his own. It was as if he was empowered with the very spirit of the Creator. The rebels began to wonder, what if it truly was as the Creator had said that day by the water? What if this image bearer really was the Son? Embarrassed, the rebel leader retreated. They would have to find a new method, and they would have to do so while they were under attack. The rebel gods began to lose ground in the battle. They still convinced many of the image bearers to ignore the Creator and label this image bearer that they feared a heretic or a lunatic, but he was continually pulling people towards the Creator and reintroducing them to the one who had created them in the first place. In the rebel camp, panic began to set in, and panic causes mistakes. It was into the dwelling that was set aside for the Creator, where the teacher, this new individual, this new image bearer was sharing with his listeners. It was into this place that the lower level rebel ran, the one referred to simply as a demon. He thought that he was being bold and courageous, that he was proving his worth to the stronger rebel leaders, that he was proving his mettle. He thought that it was a powerful act of overcoming his fear. He thought that he could expose the Son that day. Possessing a male image bearer, the demon screamed, "Get out! Go away! What do you want with us? Have you really come to destroy us? We know who you are, and this is our earth. We took it. This is our domain. The calm on the teacher's face was unsettling. But the power in his voice was overwhelming as he looked at the demon and said, "Silence." The demon opened his mouth to respond, but no words would come out. He was rendered mute by that one word. And the teacher continued, looking straight at him and said, "Get out." No, no, no. This is my host. I've worked hard for this body. I have fought other demons to possess this individual. This is mine. I've earned it. But as he fought and as he thrashed, he could feel the power as if hands were wrapped around him, pulling him out, tossing him away. For all of his thrashing against it, in the end, the demon simply fled for his life. And the witnessing image bearers took notice. The teacher had displayed his superiority over the unseen, over the rebels, and they were convinced this was the Son, the Word, who had been there when there was nothing. To the dismay of the rebels, the teacher didn't just battle them in the unseen. He engaged the image bearer's needs in the seen world, also countering the work that the rebels had done for centuries before. When the image bearer starved, the rebel gods would demand sacrifices in order to provide them with food. But this teacher simply took a little bit of food, gave glory to the Creator, and fed the thousands, expecting nothing. When the image bearers would become fearful of the weather, the rebels would demand extreme lengths in order to gain their favor. They would remind them of that man from long ago who had been tossed over the boat in order to appease the gods, only to be saved by the Creator. But this teacher simply spoke, and the winds and the waves were calm. Rather than requiring the image bearers to sacrifice their livestock or even their very own children, the teacher would simply require belief. And eyes that were blind could see, legs that were lame would walk, mouths that were mute would speak, and bodies that were dead would breathe again. In return, the image bearers gave to this teacher and to the Creator the worst possible thing that the rebels could imagine. They began to give him their devotion. As the teacher went about his work, giving all of the credit to the Creator, few strategies remained for the rebel gods, but they would not give up. To counter the teacher, they drew on image-bearing traditions to set them against him and steered the image bearers towards anger to invoke attacks on the teacher's very character. The rebels worked to convince the image bearers into believing that the teacher was actually a double agent, that he was really one of them who had been sent into the seen world to chastise the rebels who weren't doing their job very well, that the teacher was just trying himself to move up in rank, or in a moment of desperation, they went big. And they worked to convince the image bearers that the teacher was actually the rebel leader himself, come into the seen world to walk in the flesh with them. At times, the rebels would find victories, such as the day that the livestock died. See, this particular image bearer had been theirs for years and he'd been a great example of how much power that the rebels held. Even though his physical image-bearer body was weak, they had imbued him with such power that chains could not keep him down. He was theirs, and he had no hope of escape until the day the teacher came along. The rebels tried to call upon his compassion. The rebels tried to convince him to leave them alone, to leave the man, the image bearer, alone, to convince the teacher that they were actually bringing harm to the image bearer. But the teacher, as he so often did, saw right through it. He ordered them out, and though they were many, though the rebels were strong in this image bearer, they could not overpower his command. It was as if the Creator himself, with all of his power, had commanded them what to do. But the rebel gods pulled on every string on their way out, convincing the image bearers to think only of their lost wages when the pigs went over the cliff, finding no victory in the man who had been set free. But it just wasn't enough. The rebels were losing ground. One day the teacher would exert his power and order them out of a little boy that they had been abusing and playing with for years. The next day he would come across a woman that had been their sexual plaything and save them from the rebels' grasp. They just couldn't gain ground on the teacher. After his beating in the wilderness, the rebel leader waited for the right moment to enter the fray again himself. And he thought he had it. The Son had promoted one image bearer to be the leader of the faithful remnant to the Creator. A fact the rebel leader filed away for later seeds of discontent and distrust. But in response to his new appointment, the new rock declared the teacher to be the one that they had waited centuries for and said that they would follow him anywhere. When the teacher replied by telling his followers about how instead of a rebellion, he was actually coming to die, the rebel leader saw his moment. He saw his opening. See, the rebels had spent years convincing the chosen image bearers that one day the Creator would send one back who looked like them, who would lead them back to the days of glory, who would lead them back to the days when they were on top of the image-bearing world. A leader who would come and lead them to dominance in the seen world. And now, the one that they were convinced was that gift from the Creator was saying that he would die. The rebel leader swooped in and manipulated the rock of the remnant to rebuke the teacher. But the rebel leader shouldn't have been surprised when the teacher, instead of looking at the rock, the image bearer, looked directly at him, seeing what was in the unseen. The teacher did not rebuke his image bearer, but instead he looked directly in the eyes of the rebel leader and said, "Get behind me." The rage and the humiliation that went through the rebel leader's very existence. As he walked back into his rebel camp, he dared anyone to look at him and to mention what had just happened. And it was in that rage and humiliation that he would miss the most important part in the war. You see, millennia after the rebel kings, or after the rebel gods had convinced the image bearers to ask for a king that they could see, it was clear that the Creator was sending them a new type of king. He had the body of an image bearer, but he was unlike any that they had seen come before. He was incorruptible. He could not be swayed. This king was undoubtedly the Creator entering the seen world, twisting and turning the minds. The rebels manipulated the right chosen image bearers to call for his death. The reigning earthly empire would have no issues with one more fatality. And they identified the member of the teacher's inner circle who would help them. Because what they had realized in observing this new king, this teacher, this son, is that he only had one weakness: the physical body that he inhabited. When the day came, ironically, they found themselves back in a garden. The rebel leader recalled that day with the fruit long, long ago, but on this day, he wasn't looking for a simple theft. No, on this day, he was going for the kill. As they entered that garden, it was as if the son had been waiting for them. They looked at him, and he looked at them, and what they thought when they saw him was, he looks exhausted. This could be good. This could absolutely work in their favor. They watched as the one from his inner circle walked up to him and gave the sign, but then things grew complicated when the son spoke. It was a simple question: who are you looking for? And it was a simple answer as they gave his earthly image-bearing name. But then, as they say, things went south. The unseen power of his response buckled their knees when he responded with, "I am he." Those words, that name, I am. They couldn't overcome it on that day with the plagues from years before. And on this day, when they heard those words, they fell to their knees under the unseen power. This was it. They knew it. This was the end of the war. They could not fight back. They could not move. This was the moment he was going to annihilate them. They knew that he could do it, and they knew he was going to, but he didn't. For reasons they couldn't understand, he released the power over them, and they stood back to the feet of the image bearers that they had possessed. Shaking off what had just happened, the moments that followed were a blur. Some image bearers played their part in calling for his death, unintentionally devoting themselves to the rebel gods. The death penalty was declared. The Creator's begotten, his own son, was beaten and hung from a piece of wood. As they stripped away his clothing, the rebel gods saw it as a beautiful metaphor of the very power of the Creator being stripped away from him. They had reveled in victory for centuries. And on this day, when the Creator returned, they had once again defeated him. The Creator had put his hope in becoming like these image bearers so that he could show them his love and his mercy and his compassion, and in the process draw the image bearers back to him. But instead, the Son, the Creator himself, was bleeding out. And with every drop of his blood, the rebels sang for joy. They were on the edge of their seats, waiting for the last breath, for the Creator to finally be vanquished, for the war to be definitively, unquestionably over. And then finally, to the great and utter joy, words that they couldn't even put in, feelings they couldn't even put into words, they heard him say those words they'd been waiting so long for. It is finished. None of them bothered to consider the words that he had just spoken. None of them asked the question, what is finished? What is it? In their minds, it simply meant that the Creator had finally given up. He had not gone into hiding like he had done years before, but instead, he had died. You see, long ago, the Creator had hit a reset button. When he looked down upon his perfect creation and he saw the havoc that the offspring of the rebel gods was creating all over his beautiful earth, he reset it with the cleansing power of water flowing over the earth. And when he had done so, he had said those same words, "It is finished. The havoc they're wreaking is over. It's done." They couldn't stop him on that day. Try as they might, they could not get in the way of the waters as it cleansed the destruction away from the earth. But on this day, none of the rebels remembered. None of the rebels recalled that moment years ago when the water flowed over the earth. No, on this day, the Creator was dead, and they were celebrating in a way that hell itself had never seen. This was their day. He was over. But in their short-sighted celebration, none of them noticed the cleansing power of the blood washing over the earth.